it's about time I finally got off my butt and did this list. I did an old list of my least favorite final bosses, but I got rid of it. So I figured I would come back with a remake. Final bosses are the final challenge in any video game you have put yourself up against. You went through the entire adventure and journey to make it up to this point, so you're expecting yourself an epic showdown. Only for there to be a disappointment in the end. Because a lot of games have to, for some reason, end with a final boss that suck. Whether it's being lackluster, extremely boring, barely a boss fight, too frustratingly hard, and too annoying. There's so many instances of final bosses that just downright suck. So I figured I would bring myself into this topic to talk about the 20 that I genuinely hate. Rules for this list. These are final bosses I hate. If a final boss you hate doesn't make it on the list, it's because I either don't hate it as much as you, or I haven't faced them. These are only ones that I have faced. Secondly, one game per franchise. We're adding variety. Thirdly, I'm going over the reasons why I hate these fights entirely, and you'll get the understanding of why I genuinely hate them. So without further ado, let's begin the... Prepping up this list was kinda hard since I had to think about certain placements for final bosses and such, but thinking about who was going to be my number 20 was easy. Let's look at the SpongeBob games, mostly made by Heavy Iron Studios. Battle for Bikini Bottom and the movie game easily have the best selection of final bosses. They're both fun, challenging, great music, and enjoyable to go up against. Truth or Square came in as the third and final game they made up until they went on a massive hiatus and being gone for good, only to end the game on a sour disappointment. The final fight against Planktobot easily is one of the lamest final bosses in SpongeBob's lineup, because considering the game's underwhelming lineup, there wasn't really much I was expecting out of this fight. First off, this fight is more of a chase sequence where you follow Planktobot through Bikini Bottom on the rooftops, and you have to deal with a bunch of enemies while the robot is just doing nothing. Real useful there. Once you get to the parts where you actually supposedly fight him, his attacks are laughably pathetic and easy to avoid. Is this supposed to be challenging? Oh, but he uses his fist. That only takes one hit. And then you enter inside the robot and whoopee, an enemy gauntlet. That's what this fight is. You fight off a bunch of enemies, destroy generators to damage the core, and you repeat the process 2 more times with no variation whatsoever. And the enemies you fight against are also lackluster. Unlike Robot SpongeBob, the enemies you already face throughout the game, and there's no challenge or variety on how you approach each enemy in the game, let alone this entire fight. Even the music is uninteresting. They took Robot Sandy's boss theme and slapped it into this fight. Then again, I can't judge it too harshly since the game reuses soundtracks from the previous 2 games. Even then, this fight is just a massive disappointment to end the trilogy of the SpongeBob games. You're better off with the other 2 final bosses. Also, why is the DS version of the fight slightly better? I will never know. Speaking of enemy gauntlets, let's take a look from a kid-friendly game to a more serious and mature game, Mass Effect. Why does Mass Effect 1 and 2 are the only 2 games in the series to have actual proper final bosses? Mass Effect 3 doesn't even have one. The last one's just an enemy gauntlet ending off with a final fight that just ends in about 2 seconds. Whatever, it doesn't even count anyways. Oh, but Andromeda came in, a game that shouldn't even be part of the series, and it actually has a proper villain, only for him to not be an actual boss fight. The fight against the Archon, a supposed boss fight isn't even really a boss fight. It's the same case with Planktobot being another enemy gauntlet of a fight while he just sits in the back doing nothing. Absolutely nothing. And unlike Planktobot where you're actually doing damage to the boss, these segments involve you fighting against Remnant Tech while guarding control panels so that way your brother or your sister, depending on the character you pick from the start of the game, will try to gain access to get the Archon's mine out of the whole entire network. Even though you're just fighting off a bunch of enemies while a big giant thing is just sitting in the background being more of an annoyance rather than an actual threat. And besides, this game has a proper villain. And you're telling me they couldn't give us a boss fight after ending Mass Effect 3 with a non-final boss? This is a lackluster disappointment. Also, why is there another Archon character from another game franchise that actually put up more of a fight and he's not even the final boss? I don't know, guys. You tell me why this final boss even needs to exist in the first place. Also, the gameplay doesn't even work with this fight at all. Just do yourself a favor and don't play Mass Effect Andromeda. It's not even canon to the actual Mass Effect games, so you aren't missing out much by skipping this game. Have I ever told you guys the definition of cringe? Well, that's what the Destroyer is like. Look at you. You're so cringe you can't even spell bridge. Go home and never return! So Borderlands 1 is easily my least favorite game in the series. And undoubtedly, my least favorite game ends off with one of my least favorite final bosses, the Destroyer. Where do I even begin with this thing? Oh, I know. It comes to hammer space out of nowhere. This thing had no build-up, no brought-ups, no nothing. Randomly brought in, killing the main villain and becoming the final boss, with one of the lamest designs in the series. And how's the fight? Awful. It's the definition of cringe because all you're doing is shooting at it the entire time. This thing is a bullet sponge because if you're under-leveled, you're gonna spend a long time just shooting bullets into this thing that's just sitting there soaking up all the shots. If you're over-leveled, you can easily beat this thing. Hopefully you didn't waste a lot of ammo going through the enemy gauntlet leading up to the fight. Because, especially when you're preparing yourself for a final boss, this final hurdle wasn't even worth the hassle of going through. Especially with the other bosses having you move around a lot. This thing just doesn't do anything. Even with the remake, it adds in a few attacks, but most of the attacks it does is just more of an annoyance rather than being a threat. And that's the cringy part of this thing. An out-of-nowhere final boss to end this game. What a lame ending, am I right? There's not a lot for me to say since the Destroyer sucks. Well, yeah. You're better off with some of the other final bosses in the series. In fact, the DLCs are 10 times better than this thing. Oh, Naughty Dog. Guys who are responsible for making iconic game franchises, and also have the memorability of bad final bosses from their games. While a few of the games did end with a awesome final boss, Starter Game Aim for the PlayStation 3 didn't do him justice because, oh wow, that Uncharted 1's final boss had to suck. Not only are you going up against one of the most uninteresting and blandest villains in the whole Uncharted series, even especially with the other villains being bland as rocks to even get an understanding with, they do offer something, but at the same time I had no care for Gabriel Roman at all, only for the plot to be hijacked from him by Navarro, who is now our lead central antagonist, and his whole plan is to sell the giant sarcophagus for money. Yep, that's his big master plan. And let me clarify, all this happens at the end of the game. How does this make us experience this, let alone get the understanding of this twist when it happens at the end of the game? Because the next chapter is the final boss fight, and it sucks. Because we're already tossed into gunfights. My biggest problem with the gunfights is due to the clunky controls and enemies being powerful with their accuracy throughout the entire game. While I got used to the clunkiness of the controls, fighting the enemies was just not really the most fun part of the game. Especially when your main villain has a shotgun with a laser sight that will instant kill you. Which, by the way, that's not how shotguns work. From that far away, it's a shotgun, not a sniper rifle. And besides, there are a lot of exploits in the fight that lets you cheese the enemy goons, and even Navarro can't even hitting you in most points. So dealing with the enemies is already enough of a hassle, especially with your cover being destroyed. After going through another QTE segment for some reason, and you still have to face off a bunch more other enemies, leading us to the last part of the fight, which is the worst part. Because you now have to traverse around these crates in order to reach to Navarro while he's trying to shoot you down. One wrong step leads you to death. Instantly. And the game isn't clear on how you're supposed to traverse around these segments. You have to wait until he fires 2 shotgun pellets, then move to the next crate, only to try to finish him off with QTEs, run towards him, and finish him off even more. Yep, a lackluster end to a good game. Even his death was just insufferable, he just drowns. Hey, perfectly fitting for one of the most uninteresting antagonists in the whole series. As much as I like Uncharted 1, his final boss wasn't even that good. Aside from the atmosphere and music, those are the only good parts of the fight. Everything else, however, just one big ugh. You wanna know what I hate about doing negative countdowns? Playing through a game that I did partially enjoy, only to have it end on a negative note. Look no further than with Psychonauts 1. As much as I think this game was fairly alright for the most part, but man, the finale sucked. The Meat Circus is an infamous final level for being considered the worst level in gaming because of its absurd difficulty. To me, it's the level layout. At least the escorting section is short, but the whole idea of the Meat Circus just falls flat on his face due to being short and the only level in the game where you do an escort mission. All that short and annoying final level only to lead up with an insanely easy and underwhelming final boss fight. You start off the 4-phase final battle against the Butcher, an evil manifestation of Coach Oleander's father, and he's just mostly easy and annoying, because trying to climb up to his body to smack his head is annoying, but at the same time his attacks are pathetically easy to avoid. But upon beating him, you get tossed into Phase 2, where you confront Evil Augustus, the manifestation of Raz's father, and it's the platforming segment. Now admittedly, when I got to this segment, I was expecting it to be brutally hard. But it became insultingly easy. A lot of people say this was hard, and I'm like, what y'all been playing? Because this segment is easy. The platforming segment is even that hard to get through. The rising water is too generous because it's not rising too quickly. And as for Evil Augustus, he's more of an annoyance rather than an actual threat. So you can just sponge some of his projectiles. So after going through that underwhelmingness, the two of them team up together, you'd think that would be more of a challenge. No, not really. There's no challenge with this fight at all. All you do is try to throw stuff at the Butcher's leg, which is more of an annoyance than the first phase. but at the same time it's easy because his attacks remain the same, with no changes and variation. So overall, the third phase is just a complete waste. But upon beating the Butcher and Raz's father finally makes an appearance, giving his evil counterpart a zap, the two come back together, mutilating to the two-headed dad monster. You'd think with such a creative final boss design, it would be awesome, right? No, it suffers the same syndrome as Titan Joker. Awesome design, baffling fight, because this thing is piss easy to beat. His attacks are insultingly easy to avoid. Just use the shield when he does a cleaver swing, and wait for your ability to charge up in order to wail at him. And that's the problem. While it's insultingly easy, it's extremely boring. Nothing is happening in the fight. It's all lame and butchered out. I'll give Double Fine this. At least the music for the most part is good. And meeting Raz's father for the first time did show us a heartwarming moment. But other than that, they left us with a big disappointment. At least they were able to learn their lessons with Psychonauts 2. If they make a third game, they better keep their lessons learned. Assuming if Double Fine will ever do that. I've played through a lot of different games to try to get the understanding of how I would prepare my list of favorite and hated final bosses. And one of the games that I wouldn't expect myself adding to the list but did is Dead Space. As much as I think the series is pretty good on its own, even Dead Space 3 I thought it was mostly alright for the most part. Dead Space 1 had a huge negative to everyone, and that was the final boss. The Hive Mind, yeah, while its attacks are insanely easy to avoid and the weak spots are obvious to everyone, but admittedly, I think it was a fine enough final boss to end off this good game. But then the sequel came around, and its final boss sucks. Upon throughout the game, you get agree with your dead girlfriend Nicole, who's been haunting you throughout the game, and it's up to Isaac to try to put an end to these hallucinations by finding the marker and destroying it completely. The thing controls the Necromorphs entirely, and there's a lot of story stuff that's too complicated I don't want to get into talking about, but we finally make it to the end to put an end to these hallucinations, only for the final fight to suck. Because Nicole barely does anything. She just slowly walks towards you asking for a hug, even though if she touches you, it's instant death through a long, drawn-out death animation. And yeah. But the fight itself isn't even that really good because she doesn't even do a whole lot, and these black shadowy things, the pack, one of the most annoying Necromorphs to deal with, are swarming you throughout the fight. They're pretty annoying to deal with because the fight itself is just not fun to traverse around when you got enemies, let alone a target who is ready to instant kill you upon touch, making this an uninteresting and boring fight. But in order to beat this boss fight, you have to damage Nicole enough times until the marker reveals itself, where you have to shoot at the weak spot over and over and over again to end this awful fight. There's just not a whole lot for me to say because it's another underwhelming and boring final boss to end this great sequel. And it's a shame, really, because they had a lot of potential to see where they were going with this boss fight. And yet it boiled down into nothingness. Yawn. Whoopee! I'm ready to talk about a final boss I've ranted about from my old list. And it's one that I wish I didn't have to rant upon. But I'm just gonna get it over with. I hate Copy X. Mega Man Zero 01 already is a game that suffered from first game syndrome, but man, its villain and the final boss are bad. For one thing, Copy X is barely presentable throughout the entire game. He's only mentioned, but that's only until the real X dropped the ball and mentioned that there's a fake version of himself that's running Neo Arcadia. And all for what? His plan idea to be similar to Sigma from the first Mega Man X game? Even the similarities of his boss fight, at least Sigma from X1 was fun! But as for the fight against Copy X, it's not fun. The first phase is uninteresting. It's boring. It's insultingly easy. Whatever, moving on. But then, there's Phase 2. Phase 2 is the worst, because the fight goes from insultingly easy to brutally unfair. He got these halo rings that he will use to immobilize you while using the flying walls to hit you, which by the way, limits your platforming and gets rid of half of the screen of floor, even sending you down to the frickin' pit. But then there's his other attacks, like the laser attack, that will set the floor on fire, doing a lot of damage. You can't tell when it's gone, mostly because of the frickin' Cabra not even helping you in this. So yeah, you're stuck on the frickin' walls while he's watching you with his array of lasers as well, that you have to bait out or else you'll take damage. Also, may I add to the fact that his weak spot is his head. Only his head to damage him. But that's even more of an annoyance because whenever he's summoning the Halo Rings, he can literally shield himself, making this fight even more of an annoyance to get through. Yay! So much fun! This is one of the most irritating final bosses I face, and it's hard for the wrong reasons. This shines a highlight of why Zero One is the weakest game in the series. Not only did the game suffer with an awful weapon grinding and a terrible first boss, but had to end the game with an awful final boss. And to think I faced a final boss that was like him, but done worse. And you'll have to wait for that. I've played through a lot of different Transformer games to try to prepare myself to do a final boss list for it. While I'm missing 3 games, those who have been from my old list know how much I hated the fight against Lockdown from Rise of the Dark Spark. The fight was cheap and annoying to deal with. But then upon playing more games, I faced a couple more final bosses that I would try to find myself hating. I played through Transformers Battlegrounds, and the whole game sucks. But my worst of the pick is the animated game. I don't like this game at all, and its final boss was just atrocious. For one thing, it's boring. Those turrets, they're the only things that pose a threat, but once you destroy them, you basically won the fight. Why? Because Megatron is utterly useless throughout the fight. What does he do? Nothing. But stand there. And stand there. And stand there. Does he even do anything? He says to himself that he's using weapons, but the only time he uses them is if you get close to him. And the only way to damage him is by using the turrets powered by this generator, only for Bumblebee to use it in order to damage him. But that's the only time you can damage him, which is also a tedious process because wherever platform Megatron will go to is completely random. The middle platform he won't always go to constantly, making this fight more of a waiting game rather than a fun puzzle boss. And as for Bulkhead and Optimus Prime, the only amounts to damaging him is when he's traversing from platforms, but other than that, they're mostly utterly useless in this boss fight. How do you make a boss fight against Megatron boring? One of the series' most iconic villains. For a short summary, you wanna know how long it took me to beat Megatron in the movie game? 5 minutes. You wanna know how long it took me to beat him in the animated game? 20 minutes. 20 minutes just to beat this long, dragged out, boring boss fight. And upon the last few health bars he has, he will make his way to the generator panel, because for some reason he waits until he's near death to try to prevent you from using the laser turrets for some reason. And you have to use either Optimus or Bulkhead to land the finishing blow to end this awful boss fight. Even the music sucks. It's a repetitive loop. Well, not as ear-bleeding as some of the other final boss themes I've heard, but it's still underwhelming. This whole entire game wasn't worth the hassle, let alone me emulating it on my freaking tablet. Just avoid the boss fights from Transformers Battleground and the animated game, because they both suck. Speaking of Mega Man and Sigma, who is the main antagonist for the Mega Man X games, which, that's fine, him being the final boss in every game isn't repetitive, you know. But then there's the other franchise that Capcom has also made, Marvel vs. Capcom. I played Infinite, and I didn't enjoy the game at once. And its final boss. As if Sigma being the final boss in the X games wasn't enough, he has to be the final boss in this game as well. The fight against Ultron Omega is boring. Fighting game final bosses stand in two ways. They can be insufferable and insane difficulty spikes, or at least fair. This fight, however, is not fun. I would get into the story context, but honestly that would put you into the snooze because this story is boring. The boss fight itself is also boring as well, because you start off the story mode with Thor and Mega Man X. And you're ready to fight this thing, but this thing has a large health bar pool. You have to damage it to 75% health, or else Dante will die and you will fail. But let's just get that first part out of the way and skip to the second part, because the second part is what drove me insane. You take control of Dante and Captain Marvel, I think that's her name. Yeah, that's her name. And the second part isn't even that interesting as well, because some of his attacks can be a bit annoying, like sending out attacks that will push you half across the screen, using those giant fists, and laser attacks that will immobilize you as well. Not only that, but this guy loves blocking, which is really hard to break through, but you're gonna have to break through that blocking in order to do a lot of damage, because there are sometimes instances where he'll back away off into the background and send two of his goons, which don't have a lot of health, but you need to beat them while Ultron Omega is shooting projectiles at you. But the reason why you need to beat them is because this boss will literally regenerate his health. As if this guy doesn't have enough health, and besides, he's just a giant punching bag. More than the punching bag from Super Smash Bros. And that's saying something, because this thing has a lot of freaking health. And it's so repetitive to deal with. So yeah, giving a boss with the ability to regenerate his health that is super repetitive to go through is not a great idea. I find it hard to believe how Maximilian Dood even likes this fight. But that's his opinion anyway. Me, I don't like this fight. It just sucks. Now that I think about it, Sigma being the final boss in the Mega Man X games probably wasn't so bad after all. Just leave this guy out! He doesn't need to be the final boss in other games if you're gonna make his boss fight suck! I hate bashing on Gears of War, I really do. Because I really like this series, but the newer games just... Ugh. Yes, there are two final bosses that suck. The Lambent Brumod from Gears 2 from obvious reasons for being a 30-second hold the fire button down until you win, and the Kraken was one of my most hated final bosses that I've ranted about for being insultingly easy and making me go like, that's the final boss of the game? This thing? Yeah. But then I played Gears Tactics. Here is a sentence I'm going to say that you will never hear me say again, and no, rewinding the video doesn't count. Gears 5 is no longer my most hated game in the series. That title goes to Gears Tactics. Gears 5 is now my guilty pleasure. Yes, you heard it from me. From me, a person who loathes Gears 5. But now Tactics takes the crown, and even ending off with a final boss that's worse. Ukon's Hydra. This fight took me 30 minutes to beat. And it's not because it was hard. It's insufferable. Why is that? It's so freaking boring and uninspired! Okay, let me just calm down real quick, because this fight just takes the gameplay of Mario & Rabbids Kingdom Battle, but done worse. First Transformers Battleground, and now this shit? Oh, but the boss fight itself, Ukon will just hide on his Hydra, and the Hydra will just shoot out missiles. Yes, you can destroy the missile pods, but there's no point in doing that because from what I've heard, they can repair themselves. And besides, avoiding the missiles is easy. But then when you get to phase 2 and 3, he'll do a roar attack that will immobilize your characters, meaning avoiding the missiles is going to be hard. But the worst part about the fight are the freaking minions, which yes, you don't need to beat, are constantly respawning throughout the fight, and making it even more repetitive because you're left with the choice of, do I kill the minions or do I focus on the Hydra? And if you don't take care of the minions, they will become a problem to your allies. Which, why exactly does the enemies need to respawn? It just makes the boss fight so long and repetitive. And it was even worth the hassle going through this game, let alone this tedious, boring, and uninspired boss fight. Mega Dragon Bowser was 10 times better than this shit. Just, why copy off of that game's gameplay? I would've been fine with Tactics being another third-person shooter, but no. This gameplay doesn't work for the series, let alone this boss fight, let alone the entire game. Boring, uninspired waste. And this boss fight, 30 minutes! 30 minutes wasted down the drain! And all for what? One of the worst final bosses I faced? I owe a small apology to the Kraken. A small one. He still sucks. But this guy is even worse. Can we please stop? Can we please stop? I'm just so sick and tired of terrible final bosses. Please tell me that's it. Oh wait. There's more.